Good evening. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Dr. Foley, roll call.
President Reese, members of the board, please let the record show that all members are present.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and have a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I move that we approve the agenda as it's presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments regarding the agenda? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that motion carries 5-0. Dr. Foley, Superintendent's report.
President Reese, members of the board, I have just a couple events up here for us. We're getting ready to go into the next couple weeks where there's some big conferences and different things that are happening. Next week, I continue with AASA National Superintendent, which is actually in person for the first time at the beginning of the week. And Monday evening, for those who are able to join me, we'll all be sliding from the one side of the valley. We'll meet you at the East Valley Board Dinner at Mesa Public Schools, in which we will come together with a consortium of governing boards from across the valley. The following week, we have a short week, and that is also the law conference, ASBA Law Conference. You'll notice that we initially had a board meeting planned for September 8th, and those dates were determined prior to the law conference. There will be a handful of us who will be the law conference most of the whole week, which is also in person, and in order for us to stay for the full day, we wouldn't make it back here in time, and so we are moving all of our business to the 22nd, which will be a longer meeting, but important. We're running out of dates. So September is going to be a busy month full of conferences coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go on to board comments. Any board comments?
So just one thing, I missed a Williams Field event on Friday night, but I saw the mayor was there and I saw the dance team performance and everything looked amazing and it looked like a really, really, really great event. So I'm sad that I missed it and hope to go next year. It was media night. Thank you. Couldn't think of the word for a minute, but it looked great.
Thank you.
It was a fabulous event. President Reese and I were both there, and we got to see all the cheerleaders and all the football players, and they brought everyone before us. So it was really, it's one of my favorite events to get to see everybody.
I spoke with Mayor Peterson, and she was saying what a great event it was, and was really proud of the community. So,
any other board comments? All right, then we will go on to our request to speak. We value input from our constituents. This time has been set aside for anyone from the audience who wishes to address the board. Please remember this is not an appropriate venue to evaluate, discuss, or criticize district personnel. Policy KEB provides a process for complaints about personnel. Speakers should be aware that false statements about individuals may result in civil liability. Members of the board may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to any criticism, or scheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date. Please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. And we have Barbara Summers.
I am here tonight to discuss my concerns with our mitigation policy, both revision 1 from 7/1/21 and revision 2 from 8/21 21, and the progressive mitigation plan. While I do understand how frustrating it must be to be in the position that our school administration is in, trying to keep our students safe while having their hands tied due to policies being placed by our governing board, and not wanting to overpromise to any of our parents, our policies surrounding COVID this year are extremely vague. In fact, the differences between revision 1 and 2 and even the progressive mitigation plan are virtually non-existent, aside from the remote learning instructional model. I would love to see some changes made to the policy for overall transparency. Honestly, transparency has felt somewhat problematic in schools during our current climate, and sharing more, even to the extent of not having an answer at the moment, would go a long way. Some considerations for the mitigation plan. A section on some information regarding close contact quarantines and confirmed illness isolation and return to school procedures following these periods. A high-level overview of contact tracing, some better guidance on thresholds for switching to the basic safety strategies mentioned in the recent email and mitigation plan at the school level, information about outside school events and activities and strategies around them, an allowance for voluntary transition to temporary remote learning for families during times when our school and community transmission rates are higher, an addition of overall district statistics on the dashboard with the number of quarantines for the district and classroom or program quarantines if they should happen. Bringing in the opt-in now, BNACS now tests for symptomatic students on campus. Potential changes based on parent input for possible opt-in masked classrooms at the elementary level where it's easier to do and the children aren't yet eligible for vaccination. Suspending outside volunteers from working with students or in classrooms, switching back to some of the past mitigation strategies like one-way hallways, potentially adding masks as a temporary mitigation measure for a 2-week period or more depending on how numbers trend in times of high positivity rates on campus. There are many other strategies that we can look to implement at the school level, but there also needs to be changes at home. Parents, if your kids test positive, report it to the school instead of just calling them out sick. This helps the school to identify potential problems and mitigate them proactively. If your kids are sick, keep them at home. We are all in this together and we all need to do better. The freedoms that are often preached here and in society are not absolute. Our freedom is tied to overall common good and keeping each other safe. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Kathleen Richards.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm here as a parent of 2 children in the Higley School District who are both under the age of 12 and unable to be vaccinated at this point. I'm here specifically to ask the board and the district to provide parents with more transparency about mitigation requirements. Some schools in the country, and definitely around Arizona, notify of cases by classroom. We here in HUSD simply get a letter about COVID at a specific grade level, nothing more. And I would love to know what is different about HUSD besides the fact of ADA, because it doesn't seem to apply elsewhere. Why is it unique to here? It feels like we can look around as parents and see mitigations happening around us while HUSD has happily returned to 2019. Are we even quarantining close contacts beyond football? Because it's impossible for a parent to know without playing a game of telephone. I'm not expecting a quarantine level by school, but I am looking at what Mesa put out yesterday at their board meeting with a number of quarantined in the district total week over week, and something like this would afford families in HUSD the idea that something is actually happening as opposed to what it looks like now. And can the district please find ways to hold parents accountable for sending their children to school sick? There are parents sending their children to school who are pending COVID tests, and they're doing this because there are no consequences. Finally, I would like to address Board Member Wilson and something that you mentioned at the board meeting on 8/19. You stated that families will leave this district and that that's okay, and then you emphasized kindness. Since that meeting, we have lost in our district several families who I know personally and who have chosen to pull their kids or are on the hunt for other schools outside of this district. These are families who put in time for teachers, who volunteer for school needs, donate items and money to help make HUSD a better place. Their kids are the ones you are excited to have your child be friends with. These are the people leaving our district currently, leaving us with parents who come into board meetings screaming about liberties, accusing parents who mask their children of child abuse, and generally behaving like kindergartners throwing a tantrum. That is who is staying. And if we're truly okay with that kind of exodus of kindness and respect, what does that say about our commitment to the mission of HUSD? Thank you.
Thank you. And Mindy Brocker?
And I'm back. Thank you, board, for your time. You know, this is 3 meetings in a row now, and I know I'm talking into a void. Care for our children is displayed by actions, and this board does nothing, says nothing in any way that actually indicates to me that you have any intent to protect my children from COVID. So many people come up here and give you facts and figures. Some are really solid work. You know them because our health department and your medical staff are giving you the same analysis and recommendations. Others will spout misinformation to fit their bias. They feel things. They know somebody who knows somebody. They heard it on the internet that something is happening. Then they run down here and scream at you. Mask mandates are still the most safe and reliable method to curb transmission in an indoor environment, and you all know that. Whether you want to believe it, I can't change those internal biases. But it's a tragic shame. While COVID continues to decimate lives here in Arizona, hold on. This board allows no changes. In fact, you twist the facts to fit your personal narratives. You won't mandate masks because it's against the law. Yet, when law clearly says that masks are required on school buses, both private and public, you change your internal definitions of what's actually transportation to allow you to speak out of both sides of your mouth. Still, I've been waiting for this week. I was assured that thoughtful mitigations were coming. We would put out procedures in place that would help protect students. I now know that's not true. The level of mitigations this district is allowing is a sad shadow of what you should be doing. In all, they're actually decreasing. And to be honest, I've never been so stunningly disappointed in a set of adults in my entire life. I ask that you remember you reap what you sow. When you chase away all reasonable people in deference to the loudest and most violent, all that remains is the chaos you've nurtured. I haven't abandoned this district yet. Maybe I'll get the opportunity to help hold all of you accountable for your inaction. I really hope so.
Thank you. We have no other requests to speak. So we will move on. We are now at our consent agenda items. Do I have a motion for consent?
I move that we approve consent agenda items 6.1 through 6.9.
Second.
Any questions or comments regarding items on consent? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries 5-0. We will go on to information items. Dr. Foley, 7.1, Progressive Mitigation Plan Update.
President Reese, members of the board, one of the things that we have tonight is just a overview, just a few snapshots. Again, this is by no means the complete document. One of the things that we have done is, as we've shared with you in our status report, is we've updated the mitigation plan. We've been working with our administrative team on this. One of the reasons why we work really closely with our whole administrative team is they understand their schools, they understand their sites, they understand the situations, and they understand the cases. We have recently updated our mitigation plan and added in an additional piece that we just want to kind of talk through tonight. And we put some things in here tonight to just kind of do a general overview. One of the interesting conversations that we've had with our administrators is that what's very hard in this conversation is to find, we use the term the Goldilocks rule. You know the story of the three bears, too hard, too soft, just right. When we're talking about our strategies, there is this Goldilocks rule in the fact that some think they are too hard, some think they are too soft, and we're trying to navigate what is just right. And one of the things that we learned in previous years and when we implemented mitigation strategies is that one of the things we need to have is some general guiding principles that we work through when their scenarios happen, because in some cases there are, as we've shared multiple times, the details are what determine what's most appropriate for the next level, next step. So today we're going to kind of talk through some of the conversations, general gist of this at the administrative team so we can begin this dialogue and discussion. Mrs. Richards.
President Reese, members of the board, like Dr. Foley mentioned, we met with the elementary administrators, APs, and principals, and our one dean, and then also the secondary group of principals, APs, and deans. It's important to go to them because they are the experts. They know their kids, they know what's happening, they know their families, and they're very in tune. So 3 of the examples up here were put in place through the end of Q1. Suspend non-essential visitors, volunteers, and activities from involving external groups and organizations. That was both elementary and secondary that thought, you know, this is a good thing for us to do right now to minimize the risk of exposure. The other one was to suspend assemblies and large gatherings during the school day. So I think it's important when you look at this list, we're talking about the school day itself, okay? Not before, not after. The other thing elementary administrators believed would be helpful would be to have their kids go straight to their homerooms when they get to school, avoiding a huge, massive group of kids on the playground at one time. Is that something we said we're going to do all year? No. We're doing it right now, trying to minimize the risk, and then we'll reevaluate it. These other things on this list are examples of things that can be done. If it's not 116 degrees outside, then we can take learning opportunities outside. Some of them are going outside for snacks, and it's, you know, weather dependent, but timing dependent. They're also postponing or canceling non-essential travel or field trips. Are there plans for field trips later in this year? Absolutely. So these aren't things we want to get rid of. These are things that we're looking at this point in time with the number of cases that we have going on. And of course, we will follow Maricopa County Department of Health quarantine instructions very carefully. So I think we should all applaud our administrators, our teachers, and our families, because I think in my lifetime anyway, this has been the most challenging. So they're out there, they want kids in school, they want kids learning, and they want to keep them safe. So.
President Reese, members of the board, we're going to talk a little bit about things that happen outside of the school day, and that's the difference that, other than Ms. Richards. Remember, outside of the school day are optional. These are choices that people have to attend. They are not mandatory events. And so when we talk about perhaps assemblies and gatherings during the school day, they are mandatory because the classroom goes down and sits together and everybody's in the gym. But when we're talking about an event after school or after hours or not during the school day, it is optional for people to attend, and that will be a choice that they'll have be able to make. When we talk about different mitigation strategies, of course, at first I started from a sports aspect, so forgive me if some of them seem athletic heavy, but we started looking at that, and remember the mitigation strategies that we had put in place last year. And so when you take a look at some of these, they're following what happened last year. The ones I want to really jump into, though, are the reduced spectator attendance at events. Last year, the AIA came out and really had very strict guidelines on what they would allow or not allow at the competitions for what we did in terms of how many people were there. By the time we got to the winter, at first it was no one at all, then they added some and we could get some people in there and some people not. This year, the AIA has not made any directive or any decision according to that. There is not anything that's saying this is what you need to do to limit the people at the events. Moreover, they gave us a list of guidelines and said very closely, this are guidelines and recommendations, these are not rules. We're not expecting you to do everything that we have put in place in them. And so while we have that listed up there as a possible thing to do, as of this time, we have not made any changes to limiting the number of spectators at events. That's not just for sports, but it would go for when we get into the concert season or anything like that. We would continue to do that. Some of the other things that you see happening up there, we do, though, for the people who are making the choice not to go to the event, continue with the live streaming that we did last year and trying to put everything as possible as we can online so that people have that opportunity so they can still see the concert or the event or the game as they're going forward. Some of the things that are already in place, we encourage people to bring their own water and not have shared water, different mitigation things like that. Cleaning after our practices and going through. Last year, we were in the practice of inside the gym. In between games, they would clear the gym, we'd spray it down and come back in. And so that when there would be a new, fresh group of people coming in, and we would continue with those practices inside the gyms. We additionally looked, because the question comes up, what about the people who rent from us? Because we are a community partner, and there are a lot of people who depend on our rentals. And what are the expectations for them? And we are expecting them to follow the same strategies that we're following, up to and including if they are not following those, then with cancellation of the rentals. And I know that's a question we get. We've already seen we will quarantine specific teams or groups at the direction of Maricopa County Health, and we'll continue to work with them looking at specific cases and specific things that we need to do. But once again, the differentiation that truly after school these are optional activities that people can choose to attend or can choose to be a part of as we move forward with some of the specific things we're doing outside of the school day.
So one of the questions happened, one of the things that we're going to be discussing tonight in a public hearing setting, and this is one of the things that that is part of House Bill 2862. Last year, there was a remote model that no longer exists. One of the things the state is requiring us to do is that for any purpose, in the event that there was any kind of concern, a quarantine or a water main break or a fire, or for any reason we had to or were directed to close a school, we would move that instruction temporarily to a model, which we had to define, which is what we'll be going into detail into our public hearing, and which is included in right now in our mitigation plan online that talks through what would that look like. And again, this is something that we do for the purposes of attendance. This is kind of required by the ADE for ADM, but it's a way that we can transition and utilize from now forward. So having these put in place is something, these emergency plans, the state realizes now that districts need to have in place in the event of. You have your in-person, you have your online, and then you have a instructional time model in the event of any reason you would be transitioned into or closing a school, a classroom per se. And so we'll be going into that in greater detail in the public hearing.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Dr. Foley, I just wanted to mention just briefly on the quarantine under the direction of the Maricopa County Department of Public Health. It looks like that's changing a little bit. I just want to kind of give a heads up that we have heard from neighboring districts who've already been notified that quarantining is changing. And it will look, what it looks like is that we will, when quarantine happens, that potentially we will be looking at quarantining more people per case. So we will follow the direction of Maricopa County Public Health Department. Like I said, we've heard from some neighboring districts who've already been directly notified because they don't have a mask mandate that there are going to be things in place. So We follow what they tell us to do to begin with, but it looks like our turn is probably coming, and we will hear from them, which will change some of our quarantining. So we don't have the specifics on our district yet, but change is probably coming.
President Reese, there was conversation that there was concern that there were districts who were not quarantining. We've been quarantining all along. We've been quarantining in consultation with the health department each and every time, just as we are supposed to. We follow the letter. And again, as we shared, there are a lot of evolving parts and pieces to these that continue to evolve, and we are part of all those conversations and discussions. And when there's issues or concerns, they are being directed to school districts, and we are working through that with them, and we'll be responding as we have all along under direction.
Thank you. Just don't want it to be a surprise that we know they've already been notified. Ours is probably coming, so. All right. Any other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Mrs. Anderson?
For the last topic that you mentioned regarding the rental facilities, how are you guys confirming that they're following the mitigation plans? Do you have somebody there with them? Are you checking on them? I mean, I'm sure they're signing paperwork. And have we had to cancel any agreements due to not following?
So one of the most, I'm sorry, Board Member Anderson, Board, one of the most important things with that is training and making sure when our facilities are rented that these individuals are trained and expectations are laid out clearly. To my knowledge, we haven't denied anybody to this point, but one of the most important things is our custodial staff and making sure they're trained and they go back and clean thoroughly, because if you're a teacher in a classroom, somebody uses your classroom, you want to be assured that it's been cleaned properly. So I think rentals are important for us as we work with our community, but handling them appropriately is essential right now. So,
Thank you. If you don't mind, one more question. For mitigation strategy, are we ever going to consider going back to smaller class sizes? I know that funding is, not that we went to smaller class sizes for mitigation, but I'm saying class sizes have increased over the years and they keep increasing. And I'm sure they're at numbers that are still considered pretty high even for normal years. Is that something that we can consider moving forward, is start reducing these numbers in the classrooms?
Board Member Anderson, members of the board, as you know, you have a governing board policy that mandates class sizes in the elementary grades. Secondary is a little bit more challenging. Obviously, that is something we adhere to, and we could look at policy. This is a budgeting conversation decision. It's also a classroom space conversation and decision, because when you make changes and you add teachers, you're adding to spaces. And obviously, one of the things we now have a better understanding of after this past year is where are we in our capacity site review. As you know, we now have walked every single square inch of this district to figure out where are rooms, how are we using space, if we had growth, where would that be as part of our planning for. So I think that this is a larger conversation and budgeting decision, and it's also a policy decision. The other issue is the sustaining of the staffing. And as you know, there's a lot of competing conversations for those dollars. As you are aware, today we sent out the ESSER survey where we're asking for feedback, because there's these one-time dollars that can go toward investments, and anything that we add once the funding ends, we then have to sustain moving forward. And so these are important conversations and discussions, because we're also hearing people say, we want social and emotional resources, we want additional counselors, we want additional social workers, we want additional. So these are all of the pieces that we will be navigating through in the budgeting conversations and the priorities of what we do with our district. But that's where we are right now. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
I just have one more question. Dr. Foley, can you talk about why we notify at a grade level and not a classroom level as far as when there is a case?
One of the things that was Board Member Schultz, one of the things that we're doing an abundance of over-communication. In other words, because you're at recess times together, you're at lunch together. In some cases, there's departmentalizing of this so that way you are notified that there is a potential case in that grade level. So it's an over communication. When there has been, in consultation with the health department, identification of the need to quarantine, those communications go to the individuals. I can tell you that this has become a consuming all around the clock thing. I will tell you that on Sunday afternoon, myself and the preschool director and the health department were being made aware of cases even coming in over the weekend. Even prior to our ability to get a hold of someone at the health department, we were notifying families, this is our knowledge of, this is what we're aware of, this is what it could mean, and we will inform you as soon as we know more. So those who need to know more are being directly communicated with even prior to us getting an official directive to do so, just so that we can respond out of abundance of caution. But you should know that this isn't all-consuming. All we are doing is COVIDing.
Yeah, that's a great question, because grade level, they have their specials at the same day. So if it's sixth grade, they've all had art and all of that. So that's a great question.
Our hope, as we've shared with you, is that, again, making people aware that there's potential exposure. One of the things we've said from the very get-go is that one of the things we cannot assure is that there isn't the potential for exposure. Our hope is that making you aware, you are paying attention to symptoms. The thing that is the most important thing you can do is to please, as we have said again and again and again, please, if your children are sick, please keep them home. The way that we stop having to notify potential exposure is not being there to expose in the first place.
Any other questions? Then we will go on to 7.2, paid sick leave benefit due to COVID-19 pandemic. Ms. Martins.
Good evening, board member, pardon me, good evening, President Reese, Vice President Wilson, and board members, my fellow colleagues, as well as our community. Tonight, I've got in front of you some information items related to COVID-19 paid sick leave benefit. You may or may not recall back in January, we extended the federal FFCRA, Families First Response Corona Act. I think I got that wrong, but it's essentially something within those areas. But we extended it because of the fact that we did see and have high COVID level cases still that were operating, and felt that it was a best option of the district to provide that for our employees, as well as those that they had to care for, whether it was dependents at home and or additional, maybe other dependents in relation to parents, things of that nature. So in cabinet a couple weeks ago, we decided that it was worth bringing back because of the fact that we've seen those increases in cases all across the district. As was reported last week when we did our presentation, we have higher numbers now than we had last year. So looking at this and looking at the number of employees that have had to be out already from July 1 through August, I think it's best, given we've worked with individuals and they've had to exhaust all of their time because whether they're awaiting a test and or they had symptoms, and encouraging them. And what was great was our employees staying home because they were sick and or somebody that they cared for were sick. I'm not gonna go bullet to bullet, but summarizing in general, the Families First Corona Recovery Act, the actual component of FFCRA, was from January 1 to December 31st in terms of the federal component. We then extended it, April 1st, I'm all over the place, I apologize, from April 1st to December 31st. And then after that, we then extended it from January 1 to June 30th. It's still 80 hours of paid sick leave. We had that and extended that. Part of the FFCRA also included FMLA. Individuals are still eligible for FMLA depending on qualifiable cases. FMLA existed prior to FFCRA. The only difference with FFCRA was that our individuals actually got paid Traditionally, FMLA was previously a non-paid federal leave component. We would not look to offer this to employees who've already exhausted the time. So if they've already utilized it, they wouldn't get additional time. These are for all individuals who haven't had an opportunity, or fortunately, not so much an opportunity, but fortunate to not have been sick prior, but may be sick now and or sick as time extends. As we talked about it, we thought it should be probably for the whole school year, so not just from now until December, but to go ahead and look at it for until June 30th of 2021. And going back and retroing from July 1 to August 25th, today's date. So then for those individuals that have already had to exhaust their time and potentially in a dock status, we would be able to credit their general leave time back and or vacation time, depending on the eligible employee. Next slide. So these were all components of what FFCRA had prior to what we did and what we extended the benefits through. The only difference that you'll see this time around, if we do get this approved tonight, and you'll see on your agenda, it is not only for an information item, but also for an action item. We feel it's important that we go ahead and not only discuss it, but move forward with it so that way we can address employees as more and more questions have been coming up. So you'll see on there in bullet number 4, we did put an age component to it. In surveying other school districts, as numbers were increasing, a number of them came out and said, we're only doing this for our employees, we're not doing this for anybody else. We feel as though, based on our population and issues that we've already seen, where we've had employees need to be home for their young children and or younger age children, and they didn't have any other option, that we looked to incorporate that still, but put what we felt was an appropriate age limit for those who couldn't stay home alone versus those who could. Typically in middle school, they start to stay home alone for various reasons in terms of responsibility and are able to stay home alone. So you'll see that age level there. And then also, if the individual of place of care is closed and the care provider is unavailable, then you'll also see that we'll accept that for children under the age of 3. And we had done that last year because of the fact that we did see that too, where whole organizations were closed as a result, private daycares around the areas. So if something were to occur, I'm not aware and I've not heard anything legislatively on the federal level that this entitlement benefit would come back up, but if it would, we would void this and then do appropriately what the federal government enacts. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, the employment benefit would apply this whole school year, so retroing back to July 1 and going until June 30th. Next slide. Questions?
President Reese.
Mrs. Wilson?
I just had a quick question. Why did we choose the age of 3? Because we have a little gap between 3 and 5. Is the under 11 still in place then? Like,
Yes.
that's what I guess I'm wondering. Like, is that gap covered?
The under 11 is still in place,
Okay.
but previously when we had this back in the, back before June 30th, what we were seeing too and what we did, you may or may not remember, was we offered some childcare facilities for our employees. We had Kids Club kind of work with us, and were organizations where they were not sick, but they were to quarantine. We allowed them to participate in that. Okay. I left it there as an option, not knowing what may or may or not occur as we move forward with this.
But it would cover all those kiddos from
Correct.
11 under. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We just don't have facilities currently in which we are able to offer that, because preschool is, you have to be 3 or over, as well as potty trained.
Thank you.
Mrs. Anderson?
Were you going to ask something? Okay. Forgive me if this request sounds outrageous. Would it be possible to add, trying to get the vaccine numbers up, and some people have reactions and they need some time off to cope with the symptoms that they get from the shot? Could we open it up to staff who maybe are sick? You know, they get stomach aches or, you know, or whatever. Sometimes they get fevers afterwards, and if they can't get on a day, they get it in the middle of the week because of whenever the appointment happened. Could we extend it to them as well, or care for a child that may have something similar, or do we need to just stick to straight up COVID?
I think given the dynamic, sticking to COVID is probably best, and because we're alleviating 80 hours for them. Hopefully, they then still have general leave time in which they could, a day of sick, I'm willing to share my own personal experience to where when I got vaccinated the first time, it was just, my arm was sore. I was perfectly fine. But, pardon me, the second shot, it knocked me out. Fortunately, I got my second shot on a Friday afternoon, so I was knocked out all on a Saturday, but then by Sunday morning, I felt fine again. I know everybody's circumstances is a little different, but the hope would be that they're not having to utilize too much time as a result of that, and maybe being able to coordinate the potential of some of those shots as a result around schedules and what might be more convenient. But I think we'll start to get, it'll get squishy, using the word that came up last week. Squishy, I think, is a good word for that, because then we're gonna have to ask people to provide us documentation of their vaccination, and I don't know that I wanna go there.
You would have to ask that?
Yeah,
How else could we be able to monitor if people say, I got vaccinated, I'm not feeling well? This should be used for that purpose and not necessarily for the purpose of some other sick component.
For the COVID leave, they have to provide proof that they were swabbed or whatever they do?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so they have to provide us documentation of a positive COVID test and/or documentation in which they were told to quarantine by a healthcare provider. And our district nurse, Ms. Jillian Fulton, does qualify as a healthcare provider.
Okay, all right. Thank you, I just thought I'd try.
Board Member Anderson, I love that
Appreciate
idea,
that.
but I think it would get squishy for sure as far as, and I don't think you could legally ask somebody for their vaccine records too. Yeah, but it's an idea for sure.
President Reese,
Mrs. Kaler?
I'm grateful that you have put this back on our laps, and I will be happily, voting yes for this. And I'm thankful too that you chose through the end of the school year just to, give our teachers that cushion that they so deserve. So thank you for bringing this to us.
And the retro.
Yeah. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
Nope.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
This is teachers and staff, correct?
It's district.
District.
District, it's
So
all employees.
Staff as well, I think. When you
Yes.
said teachers, I'm like, wait, I thought it was teachers and staff. So I just want to make sure it was everybody that got this. Okay, great, thank
Vice
you.
President Wilson, it's everyone, yeah, all employees.
No other questions? All right, then we will go on to, thank you for the presentation. We'll go on to our action item 8.1. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the reinstatement of the paid sick leave benefit due to COVID-19 pandemic.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that motion carries 5-0. All right, we're going to go ahead and recess our regular meeting to enter into a public hearing. It's our public hearing number 1 pursuant to House Bill 2862 for our instructional time model. Dr. Foley?
President Reese, members of the board, I'm going to ask Dr. Sue Borzich to present parts of this, and she'll be happy to answer questions. When Sue started with us last year, I don't think she'd even been working with us a few hours, and I assigned her immediately, you got to start working on the remote learning model. At the time, that was what we had to work on, and it was part of attendance. And so obviously she was part of this with us last year and has been helping us interpret what does this mean with her department and with the district leadership. What does this mean for us, and what would this look like? How would we document it so that if in the event that we ever needed to utilize this, we had this in place and could use that code and capture ADM as required per this for multiple reasons. So she will start us through what the framework would look like. And again, once we put this in place, this would be a model that our district would have in the event that ever needed to utilize for any purpose.
Thank you, President Reese, Vice President Wilson, and members of the board. It's an honor to be here tonight to present to you the ins and outs of our instructional time model. As Dr. Foley mentioned to you, last year we had a distance learning plan that we were allowed to write because we didn't have an AOI or an online school, if you will. And that distance learning plan was our accountability for attendance and making sure that we accounted for each one of our students for our ADM. It allowed for the parents and students to move into remote learning and back, and provided a structure by which we were accountable for those students. Unfortunately, the distance learning plan was just designed to be a temporary tool to use until a district crafted and was approved the AOI, which is what we did last year during the time that we had that distance learning model in place. At the end of last school year, districts who had a distance learning plan, all those plans expired. And we were either required to have an AOI or we could not offer online learning for students. And so obviously HVA, or Higley Virtual Academy, was born in our district. In the meantime, though, the Arizona Department of Education now has asked us to come up with an instructional time model. And the purpose of this is just a little bit different than a distance learning plan. The instructional time model is an attendance and accountability tool that allows us to account for our students and receive ADM through different models of instruction. And the purpose of this time model is to create something that is a little bit more sustaining, that will last over time. So in other words, this isn't going to expire at the end of the year. This will go on, and it is a tool that we can use for multiple purposes. So while tonight we may be looking at this through the lens of COVID, it actually is a tool we can use in case we had a flood, in case we had to shut schools down for more than a day for students because of various natural disasters. Some mountain schools will use this to account for their snow days. So there's multiple reasons that we might want to have this in place, and so this is why we're bringing this to you at this time. And of course, we have to receive approval from the governing board, and we have to present this at 2 public hearings, and those are requirements of HB 2862. So how this will play out in elementary schools, and keep in mind, once again, this is just an accounting and model for attendance. But at the elementary schools right now, if a student is quarantined for a day or 2 or up to 10 days independently outside of their classroom or outside of a group of students, that is handled independently with schools through Canvas, through a learning platform. And that's how we will continue to do that. However, if we get into a situation where an entire classroom, an entire grade level, or the entire school has to be required to temporarily quarantine, then we will jump into this instructional time model, and this will be offered for students. At the elementary level, then, students will be attending daily live sessions, much like they did in the remote learning model, and attendance will be taken during those sessions for students, and that will be reported to the state in that model. So student would be remarked remote present for the day. Now, to note, lessons will be a little bit shorter, and the duration of and supplemental assignments will be provided through Canvas, very much like what they were in the remote learning model last year. So, for example, this is just a samples of what an elementary school schedule might look like. This might be a little different depending upon the elementary school, but you get the idea that there'll be live instruction throughout the day in core subject areas. And then office hours and independent work assigned at the same time. For our 4th through 6th grade students who might be in dyads and triads or departmentalized, depending upon what school they go to, the idea is the same. Their schedules will still match their master schedule at school, and they will receive instruction from in that dyad, triad, departmentalized model. The same as they would if they were in person, but it would be some live instruction and some independent work. Now, at the secondary schools, this looks a little different. If you can imagine, if a student or a group of students, let's say student council or the football team, for example, has to be quarantined, those kids are in multiple different classes throughout the school all day long. So the ability to provide live instruction to those students if they get quarantined is impossible because the teachers are teaching in-person classes, at the same time. So if we have a school group or a team, for example, at the secondary level that is required to temporarily transition to virtual learning, then asynchronous learning is what they will engage in. And that's very much like what we also had in remote learning last year. Students will have the ability to access Canvas. They will get their assignments, videos, instructional pieces on Canvas. They will be able to do them at a time that is convenient for them. They don't have to do them at the same time that their online or in-person learners would be doing them, but they will be marked present in our system, remote present, and the accountability will be through that Canvas model where they have to log in and complete the work. Now, at secondary schools, we do have an option where it does go, to synchronous learning, but it would only happen if the entire school was quarantined. And then, if you can imagine, the entire school being quarantined means that teachers are not teaching in person, so then we would jump back to that model where students would be attending the classes as they would in their master schedule during the regularly scheduled time, and we would take attendance in each class and mark them remote present. And then assignments would still be provided through that Canvas learning system. So just as I'm not going to go through this by line, but this is just an example of what a secondary class schedule might look like if we had to quarantine or if the entire school had to be shut down for any reason. So all in all, this doesn't impact HUSD in a negative way. This is a tool that we will use to account for attendance and account for all of our students and their learning should the model of instruction change for whatever reason throughout the year. And this is designed for students who we would be telling them that they couldn't attend school in person for more than a day. So natural disaster, whatever. Any questions?
Any questions? Mrs. Anderson? Sorry. To avoid scramble, because as you said, some quarantines may be coming, some may be coming our way. How are teachers and support staff being prepared for this? I know that there's been sufficient trainings. We have some really good people that have been hired. And I know there's been trainings in place, but to avoid that stress on teachers, because I know it's hard because they just want their students to succeed. And adding on this training, I know adds on more to their day, which is more stuff to do. Is there anything that's kind of being taken off their plate as well? I'm just going to put it out there, but the main question is, how are we preparing them right now for this?
Board Member Anderson, members of the board, obviously part of development of this plan, and that's one of the reasons why when we've been building our progressive mitigation plan, this is a component of it, and why we've involved multiple administrators in this conversation, as well as representatives from the Teachers Association. The fact of the building of this is part of the beginning of the preparation. You'll also notice that we're required to have 2 public hearings. So this will be public hearing number 1. Then there will be public hearing number 2, which we will have on the 22nd of September, which will be our next scheduled meeting. In the meantime, what happens is communication begins going out from this. This is information about what this is in the event that this needs to happen. Obviously, behind the scenes, of course, with any mitigation strategy, there's the work that happens behind the scenes, the communication that goes to the community, the schedules that'll go out, the information for teachers and how you alerted. I think you've probably been even reading in status how we're even trying to get our own student information system to be better at alerting, to communicate with people, because oftentimes when this happens, there's short notice. But this is the plan that will be helping people understand will happen in the event of any reason, because let's take an emergency, a fire. That can happen, and overnight things need to change and communication needs to go. That's not the time to start the drafting the communication for which happens. So basically the preparation is in preparing people for this transition. Fortunately, the transition this time is going to be easier than when we were harken back to March of last year, or year before, wherever we were, 2019. Feels like 100 years, to be honest, where we had never even, here we were, we launched a school year this last year, previous year without even having ever trained people in person or showed this to students at the elementary level. So we've come a long way, and hence we're sustaining that. But obviously, it would require ongoing follow-up and communication with. But we've come a long way. But this is the beginning stages of how do we help prepare and plan for people. So in the event that this has to be utilized, people know what we're doing and how we're doing it, and what information comes. So hence, there will be sharing of. This is the plan, this is the communication, this is how we would transition, this is what you need to do, that we're building behind this.
So with that said, does that mean that this is on our professional development coordinators' radar as well for the teachers that weren't here who haven't gone through it? Brand new parents to our district, you know, I mean, it was a learning curve for parents as well. Not that our professional development coordinator, but just that there's information on how this will happen. So with the start of this, is that all part of what's coming together so we can see what professional development needs to be done, what teachers are comfortable with this? Some saying, wait, I know I got through it. It might have been a blur because I think all that time was a blur for most of us. But you know, I could use a refresher or things like that.
And again, as you saw, one of the things that we built into our new teacher orientation was a heavy emphasis on our learning management system and how we're utilizing that, and that's something that sustains across. So this is ongoing and sustaining. So this is not a one and done kind of thing, because the learning management system is a component that stays with us regardless of the model, in person, online, or in a time management model.
President Reese.
Mrs. Kaler?
Just, and maybe it's just a refresher, but because of COVID, our teachers were trained in Canvas quite extensively. And again, our new teachers, that was, I know, Mr. Treat.
Dr. Treat.
I would say Dr. Treat.
Yeah.
I see his name all over status too. He's a busy man. But I know his emphasis was on Canvas. And with that said, to this day, every teacher, I think the expectation was that Canvas is updated on a daily basis anyhow, because that they know at any moment's notice, 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 of their students could be absent in a day. So I was under the impression, correct me if I'm wrong, but Canvas is just part of their daily routine. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yes?
Board Member Kaler, yes, he's being very intentional with his instructional coaches, as well as Dr. Borzich and Mr. Lotzenhauser with their administrators. So without saying it to sound bad, they're ready to go should this happen. So it is important that they keep up with it, because I think the little kindergartners, it's still a big struggle. So we probably still have work to do there, but when they get home and have to get into this, isn't the time where they have to learn it. So
Yes,
they're
absolutely.
working really hard.
It is a huge learning curve for many, even us parents. But I'm thankful that Canvas is part of our daily routine. I know it's something that all of our students, now starting in kindergarten and first grade, when they get to college, they're going to be pros. Also, I think it's important for our community to realize that remote learning was just for a season, and remote learning is so different than online learning. And I only know the difference and knew the difference because my children took online classes way before COVID, and there was never a live teacher on an online class. That just did not exist in online teaching. So just to make sure that, again, the remote learning was for a season, for a reason, and now it's online. And as much as, I never want to see us to go back to remote learning if possible, but I understand the reason for it. And again, it's not the same as online. So I think we need to make sure we're clear on all that.
President Reese.
Mrs. Wilson?
Dr. Foley, President Reese brings up a good point. Is there a parent refresher on COVID? Because I haven't been on that website. Or
Canvas?
sorry, on Canvas, sorry. We're still living COVID, so on Canvas. Like, COVID is just always on my mind, so, now you know. Is there a parent refresher, like part of a night or something? I know we do some nights. I know it's a little different during COVID times, but is there something on our website or something that's like a little parent refresher on the program?
Board Member Wilson, Governing Board, we may need to put together probably, again, we created a lot of visual tutorials on how to, one of the things you would see that, again, in the progressive mitigation plan, we even talk about device distribution. One of the things we've even had to think about is at the elementary level, should this have to happen, there are students who do not have devices at home. And so obviously on the night before, you don't send your kindergartners home with a device home. We would have a process for those who would need it, to do a drive-through pickup kind of thing. So obviously there's going to need to be resources sent to families to communicate devices, logging on, access, and a lot of tutorials and visuals were made, but those parent resource pages would be revitalized and reutilized for the temporary in the interim.
Dr. Foley, President Reese, sorry. When they are quarantined, is there, I'm sorry, a letter that says like, here's the instructions on what you need to do or how you need to do as far as Canvas being sent home right now?
There would be obviously communication with the individual teacher on a case-by-case basis, depending upon whether it is an individual situation or it's a whole class situation. Yeah.
Is there any questions for a public hearing? Any questions from our community?
So in this discussion, there has been talk of Canvas as being updated regularly and is now a part of the daily routine but as a parent, I can say, who had kids who were exposed, we got a letter, we had symptoms, we stayed home, at a first grader with nothing, and I had to ask for the rest of it. So, and I am a former teacher, and I think we are expecting too much of our teachers nationally. It's not unique to HUSD, but I don't necessarily think HUSD is setting the teachers up, having friends who are new teachers this year around the district. I don't think that that is something that is happening, and I can only speak to an elementary level, but I have friends at multiple levels in the district who are all very frustrated, and we're 4 weeks in. So I'm hopeful that this will alleviate some of that potentially. What is the plan when the teacher is quarantined? If the idea is that there is some remote learning versus online learning, which I will argue, my husband's an instructional designer, there's absolutely live instruction in all levels of online learning. But if the teacher is quarantined, then what is the plan for the students who, because that teacher is taking time off, potentially if symptomatic, or caring for someone who is symptomatic, the ripple effect of that, especially at an elementary level. Is there plans for that? Is that what is coming in part 2?
Mrs. Richards, thank you for your question. So I think a couple pieces. Good feedback that you're providing to us about what you've seen or not seen in regards to updating on websites and communication. I think sometimes too it's dependent upon if it's been a few students or several students. That's very good feedback for us because again, we're developing this and supporting our administrators through this whole process. And again, we have new people at different levels, and so they're kind of entering into this, and I think that we're going to need to provide additional support. Second, the part about what it would happen if a teacher is out, we would absolutely have to have a substitute who would be part of supporting that during that live instruction. If the teacher's quarantined, there would be, or the students are in quarantine, there'd be a substitute who would be working with and supporting the instruction at that time. They'd be logging into the Canvas class and meeting the students and engaging with them at that time.
So when you say a substitute, and I just want to understand this, because we have a shortage of substitutes here in HUSD, and most of those substitutes are not equipped to deliver actual instruction. So the teachers are now being asked not only potentially to come up with this module, but also essentially the much dreaded sub-plan for a remote learning model for someone who is not trained to deliver that model. Is that correct? Potentially.
Mrs. Richardson, one of the things that I know that we've been working on with our substitute pool is training in these tools, but that would be one of the things that we would have to make sure that anyone who had that was in the position doing that would log in. We also might end up having, in some cases, teachers, if I had a grade level who might remotely then have multiple class students in that class at the time. They might need to help cover for 2 at that time if we needed to.
Okay.
One of the things we also have our instructional coaches at the district level who also have stepped in to help in situations when and they are experts in that as well. So obviously, you are right. It is a case-by-case, situation-by-situation basis. And we're working on building the capacity of everybody. And I will say more intentionally this year in our new teacher training than we ever have historically.
Okay. And then where do the kids who are sick fit into all of this? So COVID can knock a child flat on their tush, and Delta is very different. And the expectation that a mild case is what every child will experience in terms of checking in on Canvas, the expectations, and then subsequent to that, the makeup work that's associated with that. What will be the process, or is that in process to create?
One of the things that we have been talking with our teachers and administrators on all the time is to be very flexible and to work with families. Obviously, we understand that, and to be accommodating for work, and to communicate with us on the situation. So if a student needs an extension or we need to provide more time, that is something that our administration and teachers are understanding needs to occur. And I think that we will be responsive to that. I think what's important is for families to communicate what's going on. And as you've seen, it's kind of a different, element. This age of the student also depends, because as a kindergartner, first grader, my ability to do independent work looks very different than a senior who's working on course credit. So obviously, we're going to want to be responsive to those needs.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think also, just for clarification, obviously, if we have to quarantine a classroom or anything, the teacher, although they would be quarantined, would still, unless they're sick.
That was my point.
Yes, okay. So yeah, the teacher, even though they're quote-unquote quarantined with their class, then the expectation is the teacher would be the one logging into Canvas and everything. If the teacher is ill, that's a different expectation.
That was what my question was.
Okay, we would never expect a teacher who is ill to be trying to log in. But if the entire school or classroom is quarantined, then that teacher would be quarantined, but the expectation is that they would still run that.
That I understand, but I think that we're looking at a potential for more adults and children to end up sick, especially given our setup in the classrooms. So in that respect, and knowing that we have a shortage of substitute teachers, and knowing sort of what level they are at, as a parent, I'm already stressed out when a teacher is out. And I know that the instruction is not quite at the same level, not that we don't appreciate substitute teachers, but so I wanted to understand how that fit
Yeah,
into.
and then like last year when we were kind of in that remote environment, we had teachers who said, yeah, I've tested positive, but I'm okay. And they would still teach, so they would be working with their administrator, because again, this would only be in the situation, what we're specifically talking about is if we had to move to a different learning platform for temporary reason. And so, yeah, if the teacher was unable to, like Dr. Foley said, another teacher from that grade level may be the ones popping in there and providing some of that instruction and adding the coverage for that, or an instructional coach, someone who can help do that. In a remote environment, and any of you correct me if I'm wrong, I would not, I know we're working with our substitutes, but if we're in a remote environment, we have some different flexibilities. I don't think we would be specifically asking a substitute to step in a remote environment when we could have another teacher from that same grade level who knows the kiddos, when we have an instructional coach who could just log in. So the remote environment would be very different than the in-person environment.
Sure, okay.
So,
And you guys don't have limits to how many you can have in a Canvas classroom at a time? Because I know those exist.
I don't
So
know,
if you
does
had
anyone know if there's a limit on
60 kids in a
Canvas
classroom.
classrooms?
Technology-wise, there's not a limit in the number of people that you can have in a Canvas classroom. So if a situation came up where we did have a teacher that was out sick, we could easily combine some classrooms or split some kids up into other classrooms so that they could benefit from instruction from another grade level teacher if we needed to, without worrying about whether or not that was going to work within the Canvas platform.
It does get very slow when you do that.
Does that help?
It does, thank you.
Okay.
To the
President
point,
Reese.
whoops.
Mrs. Kaler.
I don't want us to forget either that our teachers have always been super accommodating when a child is sick. That's never been not a thing. So I want to make sure that we understand that if my child had mono in 3rd grade, which was very rare, a 3rd grader having mono, she was out for 3 weeks. And I mean, her teacher was more than accommodating for a sick child. So I hope we understand that all as a whole, that there would never be a strict deadline for a child who needed help getting through an illness in their schoolwork.
And typically, we've had our normal rule of thumb that we've seen is the number of days out, they have the number of days to make up. But again, like you said, it can affect people differently. And the number of days may be the same, but one student may definitely be a little more functionable, if you will, and can get through some of that work, where another student just, I mean, I've talked to a mom who their kid got up and showered, had to eat something, and was back down, so they're clearly not going to be working on their work at that time. And so I think that the expectation from everybody in this room is that if we have kids that are sick, that we will absolutely work with them and give them the time they need to make it up. And I know sometimes, it sounds like our new word is squishy, sometimes that can get convoluted when in the older grades, because we have semesters and everything else, which in high schools, I mean, those timelines matter, and there's not a lot we can do, but we can still work with somebody. We're not going to let that happen. So I don't think that would be the expectation. So yes, absolutely. Yeah.
President Reese, members of the board, to that point, this last several years, we have had to create plans and backup plans for those plans for sub coverage, both in person. If there weren't subs, what would our internal coverage be? What would the plan be if we didn't have enough and needed to, for any reason, temporarily close a site? Obviously, those have been plans that have been internally operationalized so that in the event that they're needed, they're there. The same kind of things we are finding is that if there's concerns with this particular situation, we need to be aware of it because we can accommodate and modify for it. So I think one of the things that we have learned is that each scenario, just about the time we think we have figured it out, there's a new scenario that emerges with different complicating factors that we're going to have to work through again. And as long as we're aware of them, we work closely with the administration and the school side and the teachers to address it. And we just need parents to communicate with us so that we understand what's going on, so we can do our best to respond. To the point that when we're talking at the high school level and there are credits involved and there's timelines involved, there's processes we follow, but there's also processes that we follow when we have to make exceptions and extensions or incompletes until we can make it up. As long as we're aware, we have been able to accommodate. And again, we just ask people to make us aware of those situations.
We've got to remember too, this is also, these are temporary that we're looking at, not like when we went from April till the end of school and then from July until September. You know, we're not looking at even long-term things. If we had a building issue and that building was not able to be used, this would be used temporarily. And if we still couldn't return to that building, we're going to have to do something else to get them into other buildings. So again, this is not something that's meant to be a long-term thing. Like we didn't know if it was ever going to end before, but so this is meant to be very temporary.
President Reese.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it was still on the other topic, but I can wait. Do you want me to wait?
Okay. Yeah, I have a few questions, if you don't mind.
No, go for it.
So for this instructional time model to apply, you would have to have the closing of a large community, say an entire classroom, right? So I guess my question is, well, first of all, is a child considered quarantined only once the county has stepped in, or can a child be considered quarantined like if their siblings are ill and the county has not yet notified?
Good question. So it we've been working with the county health department, and we have not implemented additional, but we've been following their direct exclusion guidelines on all those situations. So we work with them to determine when we need to quarantine. So yes, this model would kick into place if we were directed to quarantine a classroom, a grade level, or a site. And the question that last year we had adopted initially thresholds that would trigger potential closure. One of the things we found is that we never hit that threshold. What happened though is that the last few weeks of school at a particular school, Santan, when we removed the mask mandate, there was an influx in number of cases at a particular school. One of the things that happened at that point was we found it was concentrated to a grade level, to a few classrooms. They could track it back to an event that several people attended that caused a potential outbreak. The threshold we had would have caused us to have to, it was one that we implemented upon ourselves, would have caused us to have closed the whole school, when in reality the health department said you might have, if we see more connection here, we would quarantine just this classroom. So what we're finding and what all of the schools are saying is that we're determining, the more we learn, is that it's a case by case, school by school, situation by situation, because complicating factors tend to make this more difficult and more challenging, and hence why we do this as per state statute. Literally, I have the documentation from Dr. Sonnenschein herself, when and how and when we follow what, and we are in consultation with them on all of those things.
So then, sort of a follow-up question, like, I know that an ongoing concern in these meetings has been people sending their children in sick. And no matter what side of the aisle you fall on, I know people are worried about a restrictive attendance policy. Like if you miss 10 days, then you get this nasty gram that you could be charged. So people are worried about keeping their kids home when they're sick. Does this or could this ever cover, and could an instructional time model ever cover those children that are still waiting for their test results, or have a sibling that's ill and the county hasn't yet made the notifications?
Good question. The challenge is that there's synchronous and asynchronous. The challenge is it's really impossible for a student who is at home awaiting to be able to get live instruction when their teacher is teaching live. It's really almost impossible to do quality in-person, online, and for the teacher in the classroom to do in-person and online at the exact same time. That has been a challenge. So our model is for entire classrooms or entire grade levels or schools, for it to be synchronous. The asynchronous component at the secondary allows there to be some more additional flexibility. The part you mentioned about the attendance. Last year, we really stressed the fact that there was no letters, there was no tracking And we tell people, if you need to be out, be out. This year, we are still telling people, if you need to be out, be out. We are required still by law, per the attendance, similar to the same one, to make people aware, but there is no punitive follow-through because of attendance or absence. We just need communication and to be able to document and track that.
Okay, so, all right, I appreciate it. I'll email you with the rest of my questions because they're not exactly about this model, so thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Anderson. I just wanted to add on, is it Ms. Richards? Yes. Okay, to what she was saying, and I'm glad you brought this up because it is, and I think Mindy touched on it, when students are out, and I know that it's a little separate from the plan that we're bringing forward, but I just want to reiterate that there is universal communication, the whole school for that leniency for assignments and for time to make it up, and maybe even just the understanding that they're now really behind. So thank you for bringing that. That was something I wanted to touch on. And also, it's interesting how things work out. And I know I'm in a different school district, but we just went through this in my department where we had a teacher out with COVID, even after being vaccinated, and for 2 weeks. And she was gracious enough, we use Google Classroom, and she was gracious enough to upload and daily, but one of the problems we came to, even though we had guest teachers in the room, they didn't have access to the programs. And it was so frustrating because the kids could see, but the guest teacher couldn't see. And so there was this disconnect, and I think it led to changes in guest teachers because they were frustrated and they couldn't get that content covered. And the students were wildly distressed. And so I just want to make sure, as you know, we're training the new teachers, we're training the guest teachers, and for these extensive leaves that we have, like I brought up before, that there's just not this scramble. We've looked at the technology, we've looked at the access. They know, the guest teachers know how to communicate, the parents know how to communicate, and the students know what to expect. Thank you.
Mrs. Martins, can we confirm, can you confirm the training that's happening for our subs?
So what I can confirm, Board Member Anderson, is the fact that we did offer all the training for what we were calling rescue subs, so our permanent subs that are at each site that are there daily. We made sure, in addition to the training, that they had access so that way they could go into a classroom as needed to do that. We've attempted to look into training for our guest, like daily one-off situations. And depending on the circumstances, we might want to reevaluate that and look at it a little bit more. It's a little bit more difficult because of the fact that they're not technically our employees. Here at Higley, we use ESI, as you're familiar with. And so because they're not technically our employees, that access component is a little more difficult, but we could potentially look in working with IT to see whether or not we could do a generic login in which that after like a day, it's automatically reset. So then that way it doesn't stay, depending on the length of their time with us at Higley in that classroom, if it's a couple of days or just a day, and going from there. But I do know that actually we just had a conference call this morning with ESI, and we were talking about a number of things in terms of strategies to build pools, in addition to the fact that what other districts are doing to be creative, to incentivize their own subs to keep coming back. So I know some of those things I'm going to kind of take to heart with our HR sub and volunteer specialist and decipher whether or not there's a proposal we want to bring to cabinet to discuss it a little bit more.
So Board Member Anderson, along those same lines, last year when we would have a teacher out for 2 weeks or whatever, and we had a sub, we did use district level coaches to go and help support, as well as at elementary, we have site-based coaches. So they just worked in tandem with them, and it honestly went pretty well. And I know that's not the one-day situation, but these were sometimes 2 to 4 weeks long, but it seemed to work well. So.
One of the pieces that was an important component that we maintained was those rescue subs that were kind of our employees that are intended to be like our traveling teachers, if you will, for these cases. So again, that's a component that's been an important piece that we learned as part of COVID management for covering classes, which is one of the reasons why we sustained that this year.
Question.
Hey there. So I know there's talk about confusion for parents, for kids with getting onto Canvas just because of they're not using it often. Why can't we implement Canvas just into our daily classroom routine? I think I heard we were one-on-one with devices or close to it at this point. Why can't we make the change to utilize it daily, weekly, really get into using it for assignments to mitigate the problems with, forgetting how to use it when we're outside the classroom?
So that's been a discussion, and it feels like we've been in school for 6 months, and I know we haven't yet, but I think it is a good suggestion because as a kid, even if I'm on there 2 or 3 times a week, it's not as scary or I don't get as confused because I know what to click and where to go. So I think working with our principals, that's something that we can continue to do because they update Canvas as needed, but some of them are doing this, I know for a fact.
Yeah, some of them definitely are, and it eliminates paper overall. So I know, paper is always a big thing, but if you're just doing your assignments online and submitting them there, anything that would have been paper, it really enhances the experience, makes you learn how to use Canvas and feel comfortable with it, and takes away that paper cost.
So absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
President Reese.
Mrs. Wilson?
Can we would still be passing out our food, and it would probably change a little bit, right? If we were to have to go to a model like this where a whole school may shut down, would we do a pass out at that school? Because I know that's a big part for parents right now. A lot of parents are enjoying and utilizing that the free food program from our federal government that started with President Trump and continued with President Biden. So I just want to make sure that would still continue for those families that rely on that.
Vice President Wilson, that would be one of those components similar to the device distribution that would be communicated out. So let's say in the event that it was at a school and there was a fire at that school, we would transfer it to another where there would be something similar like a drive-through pickup. We got really good at drive-through things after we figured this out, but we got better at it. So that would be something that we would work through and communicate.
Thank you. I just know that's very important for a lot of our families.
This is kind of off topic a little bit, but can we, same topic, but can we, when you talk about the letters that go out and the concerns that I think Mindy had about it, concerns about the letters for the 10 days of absences, can we send something to our community? I mean, I know we're talking about it now, but not everybody's watching or paying attention. As an email letting them know that, hey, we're required to send out this letter, but we really want you to keep your kids at home if they're sick, any kind of sickness, right now, and just make sure we're communicating so that it's not passed on to Facebook and then it loses something in the telephone game. A little bit of communication about that.
Board Member Schultz will work on putting together something like that. And I think one of the things we're finding is that sometimes when these are sent from the schools directly, they tend to be read more closely than if it comes from us, from the district. So we can work with our PR team on putting something together, perhaps to have the schools send.
I know you have a lot already on your plate, but I think just the communication and people understanding more of it would help, and even the Canvas stuff and how that works as well.
I agree. That's something, I know we talked about it prior to going back to school and everything, but it's definitely worth reiterating, yes, because we indicated there was the change. These letters by law, we have to send them out. But just keep your kids home when they're sick. But the important part about that, communicate with us. That's the important part. We need to know that your kids are homesick, and you can do that through Parent View. You don't even have to call and do the machine anymore. You can do it through Parent View, but we need to know where your kids are. That 10 days is is truancy. But if we know where your kids are, then that's okay. We have another question?
Yeah. My daughter missed several weeks of school. She has an IEP, and she has different learning needs. When, between being sick and then having to quarantine for a different reason, she missed about almost 3 weeks of school. In that time period, she probably could have been doing some work, but she didn't understand the assignments, particularly she's a freshman, math and science. Just dropping in a PowerPoint presentation and expecting her to understand what to do without that learning. Now she's back at school, she has double the work, and building on math skills is hard. And if she has to quarantine again, what's in place for her so she can continue learning without getting left behind?
Mr. Latzenhauser, can you respond to her question?
I think anytime when we're looking at providing supports that are for our special education, that we would have to work directly with the case provider and to see what other different opportunities we can. And so I would hope that we would be able to reach out directly to her case manager at the high school, or because you said freshman, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the high school, and then as well as working with Shauna and the special education department to see what other kind of resources we had to be available during a quarantine period.
I think it would have been great if there was something in place at time, in the beginning when she needed it. So being dropped videos or something.
If I would like for you, I'm gonna point to someone in the audience. I'd like for Mrs. Miller right here in the audience. She is our special education director. I'd love for you to talk with her directly afterwards or soon after, because I think she'd like to work with you and follow up on providing additional information. So let's see what we can do to support your student and help her out with the situation.
Right. And I'm bringing it up also for other students that are probably going to be experiencing this or who already have.
I think that I understand your concern with the time and making sure we intervene, because you're right. Starting behind and trying to catch up, we may need to identify how we can modify and support and accommodate with the needs that have occurred. So Shauna will be following up with you directly.
And I think that's a fantastic point, that as we continue, we're still working through this plan, and as we continue and we have more work to do. I know it does have a schedule for special education students and what that would kind of look like, but how do we support those with IEPs if we have to move to this type of learning environment for temporarily? And I know that's poor Mrs. Miller, but yeah, that's an excellent point that we need to look at and make sure that we have the ins and outs of, so if this were to become our reality, we're not then trying to figure it out. Now, details, for sure, because each student's different, it's an individual plan, and we would have to see, but how that would be coordinated, I think, is more important, that it's in the plan. How do we coordinate that? Because that is a lot of students, but that there's an identified process of coordinating, supporting our IEPs and things like that. So that's a fantastic point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. As I have a daughter with an IEP, and I wonder the same thing if she had to be quarantined, not falling through the cracks, because with putting Canva in place with regular learning, she would still have the issues and fall behind. So I appreciate your question very much.
Perfect.
And maybe there would be a contact person if your child is falling behind and needs help. And I don't know if it would be like at the school site or if it would be more at a district site. And maybe we could put something together like in that quarantine letter, if your child is falling behind and needs some assistance, contact X. And I've read the quarantine letter multiple times, but haven't.
Vice President Wilson, members of the board, I think one of the things we have found is one size rarely fits all. And really, the closer to the student that we can make that contact, the better. So when we're talking with the teacher, the principal, because when they come to the district, we're 5, 6, 7 layers removed. And of course, we're happy, but our ability to help is to go back down to the closest source to the teacher, the student, the support systems administrator, the team around them. And so what we will do is always encourage to start there. Now, with that said, if the answer is not being reached and your support is not getting there, then you need to make us aware so that we can intervene. And I think one of the hard parts is that sometimes by the time we get brought in, it's too late, or not too late, but it would have been better if we had been intervened sooner, if you will.
Well, and the Maricopa County Public Health has made it very clear we have to use their letter. Their letter. So, but it doesn't mean that we can't have supporting information. Please reach out to your child's teacher, perhaps if they're on an IEP, their case managers, things like that. So, but
I'm
yes.
sorry, I forgot that we did have to use their letter.
We
And I
have-
have seen it many times. It has
now
come
on
through our
her.
emails, but
It has
I
to
forgot
have
it had to be
it has
their
to
letter.
have Dr.
So,
Sonnenshine's
yes.
name at the bottom. Yes.
Their letter. So, all right, well, thank you for putting this together. It was great conversation, so at least we got a lot of different topics discussed and everything. So we're going to go ahead and adjourn our public hearing and resume in our board meeting. And at this point, we're on future agenda items. Does anyone have anything?
President Reese?
Mrs. Kaler?
No, I don't have anything. Dr. Foley, you have
Thank
so
you.
much on your plate, and I just want to say thank you so much for all that you're doing, all of our staff, each and every day, all staff, all teachers. I really went into this school year a little more encouraged and hopeful, and again, it's been just a challenge after a challenge. I would love for us to just get back to educating children and focusing on that, and I know that you would love to do the same thing, but like you said earlier today, you were just COVIDing all day long, and I just want to say again how much this board appreciates everybody that's working so hard, and we just, I look forward to the day where we don't even say the word and we can just educate. But thank you.
Anything else? I think we all agree with that. All right. Then we're going to go on to adjournment. I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Who was that?
Amy.
I'm like, who? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0. Have a good evening.